Hello, welcome everybody. I wanted to do a kind of a different video today on a video game, one of my favorite video games I played growing up, the Jak and Daxter series. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about not necessarily a top 10 list or a top 5 or whatever, but I just want to talk about some of my favorite things in the Jak and Daxter series, just any of them in general. So, excluding Jak and Daxter Lost Frontier and Daxter, because I've never actually played Daxter. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the story. Now, I know the story doesn't really kick off that much until Jak 2, because the first one is more or less just a collect 'em kind of game. The story doesn't really branch off that well, although the first one does have some interesting qualities about it, with the eco, uh, talking about the 4 different kinds of ecos, and I don't know, it does have some good story elements to it. And if you've ever played Jak 2 and Jak 3 and you know how it ends, then it makes it even more interesting, the first one even more interesting, because you can see some of the things in 2 and 3 that they were referencing back at number 1. But yeah, story would definitely be one of my favorite things about it. Number 2 is definitely gameplay, because even in Jak 2 and 3, even though it involves a lot of guns and stuff, and a lot of sandbox elements and stuff, they still made it fun because they made it where you can shoot your enemies and blow things up without actually trying too hard. So it doesn't feel like you're playing a first person or a third person shooter. It still feels like you're playing a platformer, but you have guns involved with it. Sort of kind of like the Ratchet and Clank series. And I love the platforming. Naughty Dog is always really inventive when it comes to platforming. That's because even in the Uncharted series, there's a lot of platforming elements to it. And even in The Last of Us, although not quite as much as Uncharted and Jak and Daxter, there are some platforming elements there too that are actually kind of interesting sometimes. Alright, going to number 3, it would definitely be the characters. I love all the characters are really lovable, and all Jak and Daxter 1, 2, and 3. The only complaint I kind of have about it is in the series is probably Jak 3, although I really love Jak 3. The character development in it wasn't that good, at least not for the older characters, because that was one great thing about Jak 2 is they did a really good job doing a balance of the new and the old characters and doing a lot of character development. You learned a lot of things about the old characters you didn't know, and you learned a lot of things about the new characters that you just met. So that was kind of the really good thing about Jak 2. I mean, there was a really good character development and story development. But Jak 3, not so much, because there's only like maybe 1 or 2 characters you really kind of get to know more, and that's the monk from the temple, and of course, Jak's dad. Spoiler. I'm sure by now everybody knows that that's Jak's dad. So, yeah, more or less, really, there's not a whole lot of character development in Jak 3. There is some in Jak 1, because you learn a few things about some of the characters you just met, but not a whole lot. But that's kind of my biggest complaint about Jak 3 is the fact that the older characters kind of just get thrown to the side from Jak 1 and Jak 2, and they're only just kind of feel like they're just there just because of the fact that they were in the previous games. They didn't really do Naughty Dog didn't do a very good job with the older characters in Jak 3. That was probably my least favorite part about that game. The rest of it is really awesome though. Gameplay, some of the new characters and stories really good. Probably number 4, and probably the last thing on the list, I would say definitely the backstory to the game is really good, which, I mean, some people might say that kind of just tags along with the story, but it does and it doesn't, because of the fact that a lot of times, if you know, a lot of times in video games, there's always a main story that is the obvious kind of part, and then there's like the backstory that you have to do more research and play, like maybe if there's side games in the series, you kind of have to play those. Or with the kind of the exception of the Jak and Daxter series, you have to play the games basically a lot of times. And Jak 3 definitely probably opens up the backstory the most out of all 3 of them, because of the fact that you learn about who the precursors are, where the who the Dark Makers are, and where Dark Ego evolved from, where it originally came from. And it's just the backstory, and I'll probably do a video on it one day and talk about kind of some of the backstory of Jak and Daxter, because a few people seem to be a tad bit confused when it comes to the backstory. They kind of ask questions like, well, where did the Dark Makers come from, and how did Eco first come about, and who were it's kind of like what Samo said. Who were the precursors? Because a lot of people, they got to see who they were, but they didn't really. The series didn't really reveal a whole lot about them. So, if they ever make a sequel to the series, which I really hope they do one day, maybe they can explain a few more of these questions. But if you study a lot of the backstory, like I said, by playing Jak, especially Jak 3 over and over, because that's the game I've played a bunch of times. I have played Jak 3 probably at least more than 10 times. So, I have listened really carefully to the story, because you have to pay close attention, kind of like some of the Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts games. You have to pay very close attention to be able to understand what's going on in the story. And so that's kind of some of the backstory, and I really love the backstory in Jak and Daxter. It's very interesting if you ever study it out. But yeah, those are some of my favorite things about the Jak and Daxter series. I may make some more Jak and Daxter videos, because of the fact that, just to express my love for this series, because I grew up on these games and just have played them non-stop from a kid. And even after they came on the PlayStation 3, I played the high definition kind of remastered version. I played those like to death, and it was awesome getting to revisit some of my preteen years of playing Jak and Daxter. So, but yeah, make sure to subscribe and rate, and check some of my other videos out on the channel. So, and I'll see you in the next video.